Dieser Podcast wird unterstützt von Kaneka, dem Hersteller von Kaneka Ubiquinol. Ubiquinol ist die aktive Form von Coenzym Q10. Mit zunehmendem Alter nimmt der natürliche Gehalt an Ubiquinol im Körper leider ab. Die Regeneration der Mitochondrien kann sich verschlechtern, die Zellen können anfälliger werden für oxidativen Stress und die Einnahme von Ubiquinol kann die Funktion der Mitochondrien unterstützen. Der Hersteller achtet auf studienbasierte Erkenntnisse und eine hohe Qualität seiner Inhaltsstoffe. Wo du dieses Produkt erhalten kannst, findest du wie immer im Link in den Shownotes. Und Achtung, mit Hilfe von Werbepartnern wie Kaneka Ubiquinol können wir dir unseren Podcast gratis anbieten. Dafür bedanke ich mich. Die Podcast-Inhalte bleiben aber stets unabhängig. Das ist mir wichtig. Werbung, Ende. Welcome to Stay Young. I haven't spoken to him in 3 months. The last time was at the Global Health Span Summit in February in Riyadh, and so much has happened since then, so it's high time for an update from one of the world's most renowned aging researchers, the president of the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, Professor Eric Verdin. I'm happy to welcome you to Stay Young, Eric.
Good morning or good afternoon, Nina. Good to see you again.
Good morning. Unusual, but perhaps this will be necessary more often in the future, a question about the activities of the Trump administration, the new guidelines of the powerful and financially strong NIH, which mean enormous cuts for many research institutions, have been suspended by the courts for the time being. But what does this mean already for Buck today?
For the Buck today, I think really, so these are unusual time for sure. One of the key issue that we are confronted with now is the uncertainty, because there were directives from the Trump administration in terms of the amount of grants that could be distributed, but this is all being fought in court, and so we do not know, and I think it's going to take a few months. That being said, I think everyone recognizes that the NIH budgets are going to be cut. The question is by how much? Is it 10%, 20%? The Trump administration is aiming for 40%. Given the fact that almost half of our budget is coming from the NIH, for the Buck or for any other organization that's conducting biomedical research in the US, I think this is going to mean a significant cuts. And I should say a significant opportunity for Europe, because there are a lot of European scientists who were established in the US who might be thinking maybe the next step in their careers could be the US. It could be Europe, in a way that I grew up in Belgium and was attracted to the funding situation in the US. We might see now the opposite brain drain happening. Hopefully it will settle. One thing that is also good to remember that I try to do is the fact that the NIH has been an incredible engine of economic success for the US. And the data says that about every dollar that's been invested into the NIH in terms of basic research has yielded about $2 of economic output. And that's pretty remarkable if you think about any government program. So we hope that cooler heads will prevail and that the administration will see the value of what we're doing. And the public certainly sees it. The success of medicine, all the new advances is a result of the work of the NIH. So I try to remain optimistic, and while also preparing for what might come in the future.
For example, let's have a look at the mRNA research in particular, including new vaccines. Is now on the verge of collapse, they say. What do you think about this?
Yes, this is where, again, the emotions and politics and frankly, things that should have nothing to do with science get mixed in a very dangerous mixture and combustive mixture. For some reason, the mRNA vaccines, which were really the discovery that got us out of the previous pandemic, and which all of us recognize are incredibly important tools for the rapidity that they allow us to develop new vaccines, this became a political issue. There's a whole fringe group of people who claim that they're dangerous, I remain convinced that they are incredible. At least this is what we've seen. And they also offer potential beyond viruses for cancer treatment. So, or for gene therapy for other conditions. We will see. I think right now it is difficult, for example, to get grants if you actually mention the term mRNA vaccine. But hopefully with the future, I think scientists will be able to make the case better than these are safe and actually highly effective. One thing that I think is important for all of us, for me as a scientist, having worked my whole life as a scientist, and being now in a position of leadership, is the fact that an administration is able to come in and in some way assail science is a reflection of the fact that as scientists, we have not done enough of a good job or not a persuasive job enough to convince the public of the value of what we're doing. And I always imagine that that if anybody would try to touch the NIH, the public would rise and would let the administration know that this should not be touched. Nothing is happening. And I think it's a reflection of our failure to communicate the importance of what we're doing. And this is why I think podcasts like yours or science communicators play an enormous role in really highlighting the value. You know, none of us are in this business. I just would say most of us are in this business not to make money, not to be famous, but for the passion of really making a difference in the world. And I think it's clear that we're all benefiting from long lives and healthy in many cases. I remind people that we live twice as long as we used to 150 years ago. That's incredible on average. And I think there's still so much potential to continue increasing our health and benefiting from all of this science. And I think hopefully this is only a temporary setback, and then we will come back and continue to do what we know how to do.
So let's move on to the positive news. Buck and your partner company Phenome Health have received, when I'm right, $52 million in funding for your PATH project. With this, you want to revolutionize healthcare with the help of AI. What is PATH?
So PATH, first let me say a few words about Phenome Health, which is not a company, by the way. It's a non-for-profit, independent organization that was founded by Lee Hood, and with whom we have entered a long-term strategic partnership. So Lee Hood became a professor at the Buck, and we work closely with many of his Phenome Health colleagues. The whole idea of Phenome Health is that if you go to see your doctor today, most doctors rely on a very small number of what we call biological tests. If you go and get your blood drawn, your doctor will measure typically maybe 50 different markers, your
Maximum.
Blood sugar, your hemoglobin, your urea. So this is the type of test that you do once a year where a doctor tries to see, okay, are you in good health or not? Most doctors, as I mentioned, rely on 50 to 100 different markers. Today, with the technology that we have, and these technologies are what we call the omics, proteomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, we can reliably measure out of the blood hundreds of thousands of different variables, okay? So there's an incredible discrepancy between what we have in the clinic and what we can do in an experimental setting. Foundation of our work with Phenome Health is this idea that there has to be a lot more information based on these hundreds of thousands of variables that we do not access, that we do not understand. And so the whole aim of the collaboration between Phenome Health and the Buck Institute is to say, okay, let's start measuring these variables. In one blood draw, we can generate relatively easy 100,000 different variables. And let's start looking at all of them and try to determine whether some of those are actually more predictive of health and disease. And so this is also part of a whole revisiting of the whole field of aging. Right now, medicine is preoccupied itself mostly with treating you when you get sick. Our vision is that we want to prevent disease. And the way to prevent disease is to identify them very early. And we have some evidence using the tools that I just described, Phenome Health, that if we measure all of these variables, we can detect the occurrence or the predictive markers for a disease 15 to 20 years earlier than when the disease is going to happen. For example, medicine right now, if you have a heart attack, you go to see the doctor will treat you, and we can save most people from heart attacks. But we have evidence that the signs of a heart attack were already happening 15 years before. So imagine a world in which you would go see your doctor, and the doctor would be able to do regular blood draw every year, very complex blood draw. And we would be able to predict, if you don't change anything to your lifestyle today, 15 years from now, you will get a heart attack. So that would be a very different form of medicine that would hopefully allow us to prevent a whole series of diseases. And when I'm talking about heart attack, this is only one. Alzheimer's is another big one. Most of the therapies in Alzheimer's fail because we come too late. And so here again, we have markers that we can identify 15 to 20 years early that are predictive of what's going to happen. And since we know many of these diseases are driven by lifestyle, the idea is that by having and deploying these diagnostic tools, we will be able to have truly preventative medicine. And the collaboration that was funded by ARPA-H, which is another organization from the government here in the US, the PATH-Study that you mentioned, is our first attempt to really start laying out the groundwork for these very complex data analysis. Now, the last point I wanted to make is the role of AI in this. Obviously, a doctor or you and I can deal with 100 variables. We can look at them, we can see them change. When you're dealing with 100,000 values, there is no human brain that can understand this. And so the whole role of AI in this is to analyze these very large data sets and try to understand them better. And it is an integral part of the whole effort.
So tell me, when will this PATH project be a product ready for the market for me?
Hard to say, because there are a number of issues related to this. One is we need to understand these systems better. And so I would predict the whole study is about 5 years. It's going to take at least 5 years to study it. Second, there is a cost to these technologies. And right now they are way too expensive to be deployed in the clinic. The hope and the thinking is Lee Hood, who is the co-leader of this project with us, invented the first DNA sequencing machines. And this is back when he started his lab in the 70s. And these DNA sequencing machines led to the sequencing of the human genome, which Lee reminds us all the time, the first human genome cost $3 billion. And today, 30 years later, you can get it done for $150. So you can see the enormous contraction of cost. And so the prediction by Lee and us is that if these technologies are starting to be deployed within 10, 15, maybe 20 years, they will become so cheap that they will be part of your routine exams at the doctor.
I'm too old.
Both you and I will still be around in 10, 15, 20 years, and we will benefit from these technologies.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully. Yes. Okay. You've been researching ketone bodies for some time. I found your announcement now that ketone bodies can modify misfolded beta amyloid proteins, allowing them to be removed by cellular cleansing. Extremely interesting, I guess. Should we take keto diet, or should we take ketone esters as a dietary supplement to prevent Alzheimer's, please?
That's a very good question. So we have published some evidence that when we put mice on a ketogenic diet, they do appear to age better. They live longer, and remarkably, one of the tissues of the organs that we saw being the most protected against the effect of aging was the brain. And remarkably, mice on these ketogenic diets showed actually improved memory as they aged versus a standard mouse non-ketogenic diet will actually slowly lose memory. So this encouraged us to really try to understand what is the effect of ketone bodies. And the major ketone bodies is called BHB. beta-hydroxybutyrate. And we indeed found that it is able to, just by itself, to help in the refolding of some of these abnormal proteins that form aggregates during Alzheimer's disease. So this was an in vitro study, a lab study. But independently of this, we've been able to show that ketogenic diet is really neuroprotective. We've also given it to mice that are prone to a disease that looks like Alzheimer's disease. For example, we can engineer mice with some unique proteins that are associated with Alzheimer's disease in humans, and these mice show accelerated dementia. And when you put them on a ketogenic diet, again, they are protected. And there's anecdotal evidence in the literature that being on a ketogenic diet might actually improve cognition in humans as well. But obviously, we don't have long-term clinical trials. Now, the problem with the ketogenic diet, and I can speak about this because I have been on a ketogenic diet. I'm not on one now, but I have tried it for a couple of years. Is a difficult task because essentially there are three ways to be in ketosis. One is long-term fasting. Now, obviously, you can do fasting episodically, but you cannot fast every day, all the time. You have to eat. The second way is to exercise. There's forms of long-term exercise that will induce ketosis, but you cannot do this. I cannot run 3 hours a day. And the other way is to restrict carbohydrate, to decrease the amount of sugar, all forms of carbohydrates that you eat. And that's the way most people go on a ketogenic diet. These diets are complicated, to be honest, because that means no bread, no potato, no pizza, no pastry, none of the things that make life sometimes special. And so they're very restrictive. You actually almost cannot eat any fruits as well because fruits contain sugar. There are a number of people who go on these ketogenic diets, and they've been studied for a long time. There's clear evidence that they're protective against type 2 diabetes. So there's a lot of good things about these diets, but they are, for the most part, difficult to follow. So we came up with a different idea, which is the idea of these, what you mentioned, these ketone esters. So the ketone esters are artificial molecules that are made out of the major ketone body and another part. And when you ingest those, your body enters a state that is very similar to ketosis, in which you can measure beta-hydroxybutyrate in the blood. And we, in preliminary evidence in animal models, we have actually seen many of the beneficial effects of a ketogenic diet are recapitulated by these molecules. And we've shown this not only in mice, but also we're conducting clinical trials in humans. And we have a product on the market that actually is a ketone ester. So I would say it's still early days, but the prediction is that this could become an alternative way to keep your memory during the aging process.
I have a chapter about ketone esters as an interview with you in my new book. So you mentioned mice. Sure, mice are good model organisms, but I saw a post from you. You said, yes, mice are good model organism on which we can test longevity research and therapies. Now you say also mice are mice and live short lives. Humans, by comparison, are the naked mole rats among the primates, and we live exceptionally long lives for our size, and we are not really comparable. Do we now need to shift research and development away from the mouse model?
Yes, I'm glad you saw my post. I was trying to be a little provocative because there's a whole debate right now that's happening in terms of, how should we conduct research? And first, let me make clear the point that I think mice are an important model. So are fruit flies, so are C. elegans, a little worm that we study. So when we want to study biology, I think it's good to study it in a variety of systems. There's one model system which is studied less than all of the other ones, and it's humans. And I think the point of the post that you saw was to make the case that maybe we should study humans more. And the reason for doing this is when we study aging, for example, in mice, we're learning a lot of important things. I certainly will never try to diminish the merit of these studies. The work in mice and all of the animal models has been instrumental to everything we know about aging research today. But we also are supported by a public who gives us money. So the NIH or the Max Planck Institute or the Humboldt and all of these organizations that are supporting research are typically funded by the public. And I think the public is demanding of us more solutions to the problems of aging. And I think there needs to be more effort to really revisit human as a model system. And the reason I suggested this is there are so many things that we can now do in humans or in cells from humans that would allow us to accelerate the whole process to generate new drugs and new interventions against the aging process. So the reason for the post was really to just throw it out there that I think we should consider the humans as a good equivalent model system. Typically, this is not how research works. Research starts in the simplest model system and then it works its way up progressively to more and more complicated. The problem is that you might find an intervention that works quite well in mice, but you have a drug and you think, oh my God, this is going to be something amazing. And then you move to humans and it fails. And actually the attrition rate as we go from mice to human is enormous. There's a lot of things that get lost that do not work and fail. And my argument was that maybe if we started more often from men directly, we would be more successful at developing drugs. That was the whole point of this post.
Another post, Eric Verdin post. I found it increasingly exciting. A few weeks ago, I guess, you said that GLP-1 receptor agonists, weight loss injections, could become the most interesting longevity drugs of the near future. Tell me more.
Yes, I stand by this. I think this is an exciting, really new development. There is one thing that has struck me as we've been studying aging now at the molecular level for 25, 30 years, is there's one pathway, a mechanism that keeps popping up. And this is all linked to our ability to metabolize glucose, sugar, and the role of insulin in this pathway. So as when we eat sugars, we need insulin to metabolize it. And if you don't have insulin, you get into type 1 diabetes. If you become insulin resistant, you have type 2 diabetes. It turns out that when scientists studied and tried to identify what are the molecular mechanisms of aging, one of the pathways that emerges all the time is insulin signaling, how insulin works in cells. So this has been identified in the little worms, C. elegans, in fruit flies, in mice, in multiple organisms, and including in humans. There's also another thing called the ITP, Intervention Testing Program. This is an NIH-supported program that will test unique drugs that you can nominate. For example, if you think you have a drug that will delay aging, you can write a short paper, 2 or 3 pages, send it to the NIH, making the case for the fact that drug might be increasing lifespan, and it will be reviewed by a committee of experts. And if they are convinced of your hypothesis, they will actually do the experiment and they will feed the drug to mice for 3 years and measure their lifespan. And so this program has been in place for, I think, more than 10 years. They've tested 70 different molecules, and I think more than 10 have emerged as having a very strong effect on lifespan. So these are drugs, when given to these animals, will increase their lifespan by a minimum of 10, 15%, sometimes up to 20%. So really significant. If you think about a human, that would be a drug that would increase our lifespan by 15 to 20 years. So pretty remarkable and exciting. And what's amazing is that many of the drugs that have emerged out of this program are targeting, again, glucose and insulin signaling. And several of these drugs are actually approved in the clinic. One of them is famous, called acarbose. It prevents the absorption of sugar in your intestine. Another one is canagliflozin, which is, or Jardiance. It's a type 2 diabetes medicine, which prevents, lowers your blood sugar by working on the kidney. There's been a lot of talks about the role of metformin, which is another type 2 diabetes drug, which also seems to be increasing lifespan or health span or both. So, meaning to say there are so many things, so many convergent evidence that always point to that pathway, insulin signaling and glucose metabolism, as being the pathways that drive aging, when the incretins, GLP-1 agonist, semaglutide, Ozempic, Mounjaro, Zepbound, all of these names that we all hear about came on the market. These are drugs that were initially developed as anti-diabetic drugs, again, targeting insulin signaling. The secondary discovery was the fact that these drugs also allow people to lose weight. And so now we have millions of people in this country, across the world, who've been taking these drugs for close to 10 years. So they appear to be remarkably safe. But the thing that has emerged that is quite interesting is this seemed to have some protective effect on the brain, on the kidney, on the heart. So we're seeing, again, the same pattern emerge. A drug that was initially developed against type 2 diabetes seems to have global health protective effect. And so the prediction, and there's a whole school of people who have been experimenting on this, taking them at lower dose. So these are people who might not be obese, they might not be diabetic, but they're still taking the drug and in some cases reporting some interesting beneficial effect. So I was, again, a little bit of a provocative post, not provocative for the sake of being provocative, but really bringing it up to people's consciousness that we should really maybe think about these drugs as maybe a first global anti-aging drug that will be available. So we will see. Obviously, the experiments have to be done in the long term, but they certainly look very promising.
Yeah, and so many people are taking now these weight loss injections for longevity effect. And they don't know whether it's really proved, but they do it. Last question. The 12 hallmarks of aging are something like the holy grail at the entrance to longevity science. For a few weeks now, there have been 14 hallmarks, and we are looking more and more closely to see whether certain hallmarks could be fundamental ones that, so to speak, control the others. Please enlighten us.
The Hallmarks of Aging was a scientific paper that was written by a friend and a colleague, Guido Krömer, who is, I believe he's Austrian and French and Spanish. He has multiple nationalities. Brilliant man. Came up with the idea of categorizing the problems that are associated with aging in a series of hallmarks. This had been done before for cancer. There's a very classic paper called The Hallmarks of Cancer, which identified a whole series of molecular abnormalities in cancer. In this case, they did it for aging. And what it was is a sort of an attempt to organize the field and trying to describe all of the abnormalities that happen in cancer. Now, the reason why this initial effort was important is because it really allowed you to define what the problem is. The problem of aging is very complex. As you mentioned, there have been between 10 and 14 different hallmarks of aging, and people are still arguing as to how many exactly there are. It's a futile discussion. The problem is that aging is multifactorial, and which also means that there is not going to be a simple answer to aging or magic pill that some people still hope will solve everything. So we want to understand aging and fight it. We have to understand all of these variables. The paper of the Hallmarks of Aging was important as an organization tool, but we are all realizing that all of these hallmarks are intricately linked to each other. They're not really discrete little boxes in which something happens that you have to solve. If you interfere, for example, with one of the hallmarks, you might actually be correcting 3 other hallmarks. And this is where the field is right now, is trying to get a much more integrated view of these hallmarks of aging and the mechanism of aging. Now, why is that important? Is at this point, we all recognize that, for example, you can solve the mitochondria problem. Mitochondria are these little, think of them as the power center in the cell that allow you to generate energy. And we know that as you age, mitochondria become less and less effective. So mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the hallmarks of aging. But we also know that if you solve that problem, you don't solve aging. And we know that mitochondrial function will have an effect on stem cells, for example. So stem cell dysfunction is also a hallmark of aging. So right now what the field is really trying to do is to get a much more integrated view of the aging process, and also trying to identify what we call nodes. That is, how many interventions do we need to generate against aging, and how do these interventions interact with each other? That's really the next frontier in terms of where we're moving in aging science.
Mm-hmm. And there is one hallmark of aging or two which are causing a little bit the others, or isn't there a hierarchy?
Yes, there's the degree of hierarchy. For example, a hallmark on aging that we are working on a lot is inflammation. Okay, so this idea that chronic inflammation occurs during aging, and it is caused by a whole series of problems, but itself becomes part of the aging process. So it's a really maladaptive. We all know about inflammation that you get if you cut yourself, for example. If you burn your skin, you will have a little bubble. It will become red. It will become painful. Eventually, the bubble is going to shrink. You're going to have a little crust. And eventually, so this is, all of these reactions are part of what we call inflammation. This is a repair process in the body. It turns out as you age, your body accumulates damage for a whole series of reasons. I'll take the example of ultraviolet light. You go outside, you get exposed to the sun, you can get a burn. But even if you don't get a burn, the UV irradiation will induce DNA damage. All of this creates damage in our bodies. This is what drives the aging process. And our body responds to all of these insults by repairing itself via inflammation. At some point during the aging process, we are not able to repair as efficiently. And then this leads to something chronic inflammation. The problem is that the chronic inflammation normally resolves itself. Once you've had a burn and the crust has fallen off, your skin looks like it used to look at the beginning. It's completely repaired and there's no trace of it. In the case of chronic inflammation, because the problem can never be completely solved, it stays there all the time. And so there's really a lot of work on trying to understand this whole process that people call inflammaging and its role in the aging process. Because it turns out that the inflammation itself becomes one of the problems on top of everything else. So obviously the whole aging process is very complicated. We're still, according to what I've seen in early days in understanding this process, and there are amazing discoveries to come in the future. So this is what we're keeping working on.
And could be that the weight loss injections could decrease the inflammation, the silent inflammation a little bit. So let's finish with a little bit of optimism. Name one of your research areas that will be particularly important for us, please.
Oh, this is really tough. You're asking me to choose between my children. And
Okay.
I
do understand. Yeah.
Two areas that I'm really excited about is what we call these biomarkers of aging. We talked about phenome health early in this discussion. There right now is an explosion in the study of all these biomarkers of aging. So again, things that are in your blood that you can detect, that change during the aging process, and hopefully that change if you actually are intervening, either with a drug or a lifestyle modification. I would predict that within the next 5 years, we will have these tools available. Some of them are available clinically right now. You can buy some kits. I would argue that they're not ready for prime time in terms of the consumer market, even though you can buy them. But in the next 5 years, I think we're going to learn a lot about how do we assess health. We all go through life in some way, somewhat blind. We all think we're doing the best we can to try to stay healthy, but we don't really have an indication. And so these tools are going to be key in the future, not only for you and I to decide, okay, am I doing the right thing, but also to make recommendations. We tell everybody you should go on this diet or this diet. You should not eat this. the likelihood is that many of these recommendations are going to be highly individual. So this is what we call personalized or precision medicine. And that these tools are going to allow us what is working for you, Nina, what is working for me, and what is working for Brian Johnson. We all heard about Brian Johnson and what he is trying to do in terms of optimizing his health. And what he's doing is working very well for Brian Johnson, but there's a good recognition that it might not be working for anybody else because he is Brian Johnson. So there is really a need to develop these individualized tools to allow you to assess your health and to modify it accordingly. So that's one area that I'm really excited about. We do study the role of inflammation and the role of the immune system in aging. There is growing evidence that the immune system is key in the aging process. We are learning how to recognize the signs of aging in that system. And one of the beauty of the immune system is that we can study it readily simply by drawing blood out of your arm. We can get all of the blood cells. We can study them in the lab. We could modify them and reinfuse them. And there's evidence right now emerging that the immune system appears to be dominant in terms of its role in aging. There are two organs that appear to be really critical. It's the brain and the immune system. And the reason for this is probably because they are distributed organs. So we have immune cells in every tissue of our body. The brain itself coordinates everything. So these are the two key organs that you want to keep healthy as you age. And since we're working on it, we're quite excited because it means that it is one of the central organs in the whole aging process. And I expect also in this area, in the next few years, a lot of advances in novel medicines that will come our way.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your time and your valuable insights. It's a huge amount of information for our really happy viewers and listeners. In 3 months at the latest, it will be time for the next update. Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Danke fürs Zuhören. Ich hoffe, diese Folge hat dir gefallen. Weitere Informationen findest du wie immer in den Shownotes. Wenn du etwas in dieser Folge gelernt hast und diesen Podcast unterstützen möchtest, würde ich mich über eine Bewertung freuen. Damit hilfst du mir und anderen Zuhörern, dass dieser Podcast und seine Inhalte leichter gefunden werden. Besuch mich auch auf meinen anderen Kanälen bei Instagram, TikTok, Facebook oder YouTube. Ich freue mich immer über Feedback und weitere Fragen von dir. Alles wird gut, aber nicht von alleine.